But first, are we about to see Australia's bold public anti-China statements against Beijing's aggressive tactics pegged back by political power brokers? That could be right. You see, in the embers of this year's coalition loss to Labor, there's word today that the post-election reviews are revealing some sobering news about what Chinese Australians think of the harsh tone against their country of origin. According to the Australian Today, senior Liberal Party sources say the party has uncovered a Chinese Australian voter backlash as Scott Morrison and Peter Dutton drove home their anti-China stance during the campaign. Now, I'm hugely sceptical of this, and I'll explain why. I don't care where it's coming from. It is not a scientific finding and probably all supposition. But this so-called new analysis is showing that the Liberal Party recorded massive swings against it in seats with high numbers of Chinese Australian voters. Now, this has significant ramifications, not just for opposition leader Peter Dutton, who's reportedly now under some pressure to adopt a more nuanced approach in his attacks on Beijing, but for the new Labor Prime Minister Anthony Albanese as well. Neither of the major parties, which both scored record low primary votes at the election, will want to see Australia's large Chinese community abandon them. In fact, the Liberal Party review is also looking at how to win back Chinese Australians who may have abandoned the party. But today, confronted by that argument that he might need to tone it down, Peter Dutton wasn't showing any signs of backing off.
The Chinese Communist Party has been very clear about their intent in relation to Taiwan, and nobody's exaggerating, nobody's making this up, and if we want to be frank and honest, then that's better than a model of appeasement. And I've always believed that the only way that we can maintain peace in our region is if we call out bullying behaviour and bad practice. And if we do that, we can have a prevailing peace and we can have a normalised relationship with China.
Good on him. History has proven repeatedly that a policy of appeasement is not a policy at all. It is a pathway to surrender. Now, the submissions being received by Liberal strategists are basing their evidence on, one, anecdotal feedback at polling booths, which is fair enough, it's worth something, and Australian Bureau of Statistics census data, which has been overlaid with election results. That is hardly scientific. It is not qualitative survey research, but it may be enough to force both the government and the opposition to change their narrative around Beijing's aggressive tactics on issues about military and trade. And you'd have to wonder whether a more limp approach from here recharges Beijing's aggression and ambitions even further in the region. I think it would. Correlation is not causation. Many of those electorates were teal battlegrounds. The results may have more to do with the well-funded drive by the teal independents, who all bashed up sitting Liberal candidates over women, integrity and climate change. But the major parties will be very sensitive about wanting to attract support from the Chinese Australian community. While the country needs to remain strong, it needs to remain defiant in the face of edicts handed down from Beijing about how we should behave, we may very well see a more nuanced approach to China from now on. Dutton in particular, he's sitting in the cheap seats of opposition. He doesn't want to be there. He wants to do all he can to claw the Liberal Party back into some kind of contention, and that may mean taking the foot off China's throat and taking maybe a more constructive approach. I don't know. Today, he did recognise how important it is to respect Australia's Asian community.
Where it's pointed out, we have an incredible diaspora community of people of Chinese heritage and Asian heritage in our country, and we should celebrate that. And they're in a country like ours because they value peace and because they want to be part of a wonderful democracy where we value the rule of law, and we call out people like President Putin and President Xi for their activities and their actions. And we want, as I say, a normalised relationship with China.
And that's another reason why I don't believe any of these power brokers. Before anyone retreats into their bunkers over China for the sake of lost votes, allegedly, they should all bear in mind that if Chinese Australians are so loyal and so devoted to the Chinese Communist Party, why have they moved their families lock, stock and barrel to Australia? Now, once Anthony Albanese returns from his holiday break in WA, it'll be interesting to see whether he tones things down on China. We'll be watching. Now, it recorded a lower primary vote than the coalition and didn't have to contend with the teal juggernaut. So they might be in a little bit more of a drama when it comes to the Chinese community. Now, the acting PM, Richard Marles, was very careful today in what he said on this issue.
Well, we want to maintain the most productive relationship we can with China. We will always speak to our national interests, which is what we've been doing. And the global rules-based order, freedom of navigation, for example, in places like the South China Sea are really fundamental to Australia's national interest, being a trading island nation where most of our trade goes through that body of water. So we will always speak to those interests, but we also we seek to speak in a professional, respectful, diplomatic tone, and that's all we can do.
Maybe they're already tiptoeing. It certainly sounded like it from that. We can be sure of one thing, whether the language towards Beijing changes or not. Both major parties will be going on a charm offensive now to avoid alienating Chinese Australian voters. So keep an eye out for multiple grants to Chinese-connected community groups. Keep an eye out for lots of political big names popping up in these seats in suburbia, and all the bottom kissing they can muster. Because if the majors do recognise they've lost the Chinese community and think that that is a real fact, they'll be going all out to make that a temporary aberration.